While the modern F-Type of the 2010s would become the grand touring flagship of the Jaguar firm, the concept behind such a machine dates back further than one might expect to the late 1980s, when during a turbulent period for the recently liberated Jaguar company, it came tantalisingly close to putting this exceptional-looking machine into production under the codename XJ41 and 42. Sadly, due to the unstable finances of the firm, together with a new management from the United States with more pressing issues of existing operations on their mind, the scheme fell through, and the brand of the Big Cat would have to wait a little longer for its Grand Tourer revival. The story of the Jaguar F-Type begins with its spiritual predecessor, the Jaguar E-Type of 1961, a car that took the world by storm upon its launch thanks to its incredible mixture of style and performance that was unmatched by any of its contemporaries. Its top speed figure of 150 miles an hour, combined with beautiful wind tunnel looks, making it the must-have Grand Tourer for the emerging new money of the 1960s. The E-Type Series 1, both in open-top and hard-top coupe configuration, would become one of the most sought-after classics of all time, and regularly command resale values far beyond its original retail price, the E-Type being able to maintain its mass appeal throughout the decade, with the subsequent Series 2 of 1968, which introduced numerous styling and mechanical changes to meet American safety and emissions legislation. However, it is generally considered that the E-Type lost its charm with the Series 3 of 1971, a car that followed the American legislation so stringently that it became unattractive, while at the same time sporting a gigantic 5.3-litre V12 engine that came onto the market just in time for the oil crisis of 1973, thus making the last generation of the mighty E-Type something of a mediocrity when compared to what had come before. At the time, though, the engineers at Jaguar were acutely aware that an E-Type replacement was needed, and thus from 1966, under the direction of Chief Engineer Malcolm Sayer, Project XJ41 commenced as a dedicated E-Type successor that was expected to incorporate many innovative styling and mechanical upgrades. This would include the replacement of the original inline-six engine with a V12 power unit, so as to allow the car to remain competitive against a new trend of V12-powered Italian Grand Tourers, such as the Ferrari Daytona, although come 1968, around the time of Jaguar's merger into the ranks of the car-making empire of British Leyland, the XJ21's progress had slowed to a crawl due to delays in developing the V12 engine and coming to a consensus on the styling of the car itself. Therefore, in order to get a suitable replacement to the Series 2 E-Type onto the market as quickly as possible, a new project dubbed the XJ25 was launched, which fitted the regular E-Type with the new V12 engine, and thus allowed for immediate sales entry, coming onto the market in 1971 as the Series 3, while in the background, the XJ21 project was rebooted in 1969 as the XJ27 Coupe and XJ28 Roadster. These new projects would eschew nearly all of the styling cues of the XJ21 due to the car bearing too many resemblances to the E-Type, and thus giving the impression that it was simply a warmed-up version of the original winning design. What resulted was the new model taking on a more angular aesthetic, which included, much to the perceived controversy of the buying public, flying buttresses at the rear of the hardtop coupe, which eventually became the only model developed due to American road safety laws threatening to ban the sale of convertible cars in the United States. The XJ27 would lead ultimately to the long-delayed launch of the E-Type replacement, the XJS, in 1975, a model that was complimented for its V12 power and exceptional comfort, but could not fill the shoes left by its predecessor, the car being met with a largely ambivalent response by consumers, while build quality faults and its incredibly thirsty V12 engine only served to exacerbate its already dubious image. The XJS was thus barely able to survive the coals of British Leyland chairman Sir Michael Edwards following the 1975 bankruptcy of the firm, and struggled along with middling sales well into the 1980s until the threat of banning convertibles in the United States was lifted, with the car being finally given the drop-top variant it deserved, and turning the XJS from one of Jaguar's biggest failures into one of its greatest successes. Despite this, though, the XJS still had a pervasive image problem that meant it wasn't considered a classic in the same vein as the E-Type, and thus Jaguar's design and engineering teams had long considered rectifying this problem by way of a new car that would follow the same spirit as the 1960s Barnstormer, but be updated both mechanically and stylistically for the market of the 1980s. This project, which would revive the naming convention of Jaguar's golden era, was christened the F-Type, and was officially launched in the spring of 1980 amid various events that would ultimately dictate the future of the Jaguar company, The most important being that John Egan, a visionary figure within the ranks of Jaguar, had been persuaded to become chairman of the firm following several controversial predecessors who had either done little or nothing to improve the company's foundering position in the luxury car market. Egan's rise to the rank of Jaguar chairman was coupled to the commitment of Sir Michael Edwards that the car maker would be given its independence from British Leyland at some point during the first half of the decade. One of the milestones to take place in 1980 was the signing off of the long-debated XJ40 for production during July of that year as a replacement for the XJ Series 3. Much like the concept behind the XJS 10 years prior, the new F-Type came in both a hardtop coupe and drophead version dubbed the XJ41 for the former and XJ42 for the latter. And within months, just as the XJ40 saloon was nearing its entry into production, the engineering configuration for the F-Type was outlined, based primarily on the underpinnings of the XJ40. The original intention for the XJ41 and 42 was to use the AJ6 inline-6 power unit from the saloon with a 3.6-litre displacement. The model lineup for Jaguar by 1984 being the XJ40 at the bottom, the XJ41 and 42 as entry-level luxury Grand Tourers, and the XJS as the flagship model. The design for the new F-Type bringing over much inspiration from the preceding E-Type, but had been updated to suit the stylistic trends of the early 1980s. This resulted in a low-drag shape with a smooth and bumperless front and rear that was complemented by a distinct lack of straight lines or hard angles, as per the XJS, in favour of curves and sweeping corners. Another obvious influence on the look of the XJ41 and 42 being the 1978 XJS Spider concept car that had been starred by Italian engineers Leonardo Fioravanti, Sergio Pininfarina, and Renzo Carli at the Carrozzeria Pininfarina. Desperate to ensure a return onto the American market, especially in the wake of such failures in the United States as the Triumph TR7 and Rover SD1, British Leyland's management wasted no time in backing the F-Type project, with approval given by Sir Michael Edwards, together with the Jaguar Company Board, in July 1982. This being followed in January 1983 by the release of the first styling models that were sent out to customer clinics for public appraisal. Meanwhile, the set launch date for the F-Type was to be March 1986. The overarching intention of the XJ41 and 42 being to provide a lower price but much sportier alternative to the XJS, in the same vein as the original E-Type was to the likes of the Jaguar Mark X in the 1960s, with design emphasis being placed on sure-footed high-speed handling as opposed to all-out luxury. Initial performance predictions for the car were a top speed of 159 miles an hour and a 0-60 time of 6.6 seconds, slightly slower than the Porsche 928's 0-60 time of 5.4 seconds, but equal to the Mercedes-Benz 560 SL with a 5.5-litre V8 engine. Sadly, the progress of the F-Type was closely intertwined with that of the XJ40, which, not long after its development began, ran into significant delays due to problems creating the AJ6 engine, which itself was the third attempt by Jaguar to create a suitable successor to the venerable XK engine of 1949, meaning the original launch date of 1986 for the XJ41 and 42 was pushed back to late 1988. Despite this, though, the additional 2 years meant further testing could be conducted by the design team so as to ensure that the car was as competitive as possible amid rapidly changing trends throughout the decade, with customer preferences moving steadily towards performance-orientated machines rather than cars with the greatest possible emphasis on outright luxury with a sporting edge as per the XJS. Thus, the original 3.6-litre displacement AJ6 power unit, as fitted to lower-end versions of the XJS from 1983, was replaced by a 4-litre twin-turbocharged version producing 330 horsepower, Jaguar's designers being given great enthusiasm to push the F-Type as far as possible, thanks to its final release from the grip of British Leyland during 1984, and the highly anticipated launch of the XJ40 in 1986 after 14 years of fragmented development. With this, more weight was added, and the car became wider to the point that it exceeded the XJS in terms of girth, though ironically being less spacious than the Jaguar flagship, the original intention for the F-Type to replace the XJS as company flagship now no longer being its priority. The XJS by 1985 had finally seen its sales face a huge resurgence thanks to various changes in the design, including a less thirsty 6-cylinder version that was more attractive to budget buyers than the V12, an initial cabriolet released in 1983, and a much-desired full convertible offering envisaged for release in 1988. Sadly, this enthusiasm for the F-Type quickly turned sour during 1987, when the carryover XJ40 suspension, which was notorious for its faults in the saloon, was questioned as to its potential reliability in the upcoming XJ41 and 42, while the turbo and four-wheel drive derivatives were pressed front and center over the standard rear-wheel drive variant, and the crash structure faced revision after revision. The interior was also changed from a modified XJS layout to a bespoke configuration that was costly to implement, the result being that the heavier and more powerful versions of the car proposed in 1985 becoming the standard model in order to compensate for these many design compromises. A year later, the four-wheel drive and turbocharged versions were merged into a single unit, thus adding further weight and mechanical complications as turbochargers and transmissions were hastily modified for their shotgun marriage, though this gave the car the power and handling necessary to put it on par with potential rivals. The resultant machine had thus essentially forgone all of its enthusiast credentials it had originally been proposed with, as a true driver's car with rear-wheel drive manual transmission and a non-turbocharged engine, as per the authentic and classic feel of the legendary E-Type, the F-Type now entering the final stages of its development during 1988, and continued to be passed around customer clinics, with overwhelmingly positive responses being received. The expectation was that, based on the sales smash of the XJS and XJ40, the newly independent Jaguar would be complemented greatly by the F-Type, as the car to fully cement that it was capable of being competitive once again on the luxury and sports car markets after years of neglect and mismanagement by British Leyland, shedding its old man's image in favour of one that was aimed squarely at the aspiring young drivers of Wall Street, Beverly Hills and the West End. At the same time, renowned German coach builder Karmann was commissioned to build 3 fully finished prototypes that would undergo final testing before tooling up for production, the 2 body styles ultimately settled upon being a full convertible and a coupe, the latter of which would feature a lift-out sunshine roof as per the Rover 220 Coupe or Tomcat, one of the most popular 2-door coupes on sale at the time. Testing of the prototypes began at the Nardo test track in southern Italy in early 1989, during which the Targa-topped version exceeded 170 miles an hour, regardless of its incredible weight and mechanical compromises, the motoring press at the time showing great excitement at the possibility of a dedicated E-Type replacement, even though the project itself was over 2 years delayed from its original launch date and wasn't expected to enter sales until 1994 at the earliest. Unfortunately, despite the praise the F-Type had received, the dream of a strong and independent Jaguar rapidly fell into a nightmare, as while the XJS continued to sell strongly across the globe, what profits it made was sucked up by the disastrous XJ40 saloon and its many reliability and build quality problems, once which had seen a titanic wave of warranty claims being made against Jaguar that were bleeding the company dry. The XJ40's failure only served to embolden its adversaries at BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and most crucially the newly established Lexus division of Toyota, a marque that prided itself on the mechanical and technical fidelity of its pioneer model, the LS400, a machine that made the XJ40 look decades out of date by comparison. With the expectation being that Jaguar was to be rendered bankrupt by 1990, the company initially entertained a takeover offer from General Motors, only for the rival Ford to step in at the last minute and buy up the firm in its entirety in November 1989. However, Ford's executives, when inspecting their newly purchased asset in early 1990, were alarmed by the outdated production equipment and practices present at Jaguar's Browns Lane factory in Coventry, and thus outlined a sweeping investment to completely refurbish the assembly line so as to cut losses and improve product quality. With the rectification of the faults at Browns Lane being the sole objective of Ford for its early days managing Jaguar, this meant that any other projects either fell by the wayside or were heavily scrutinized for their potential commercial value. The F-Type, now 4 years late and burdened by an overweight design that had ballooned to 307 kilograms beyond its original specification, being considered by the Ford management to be nothing more than a drain on Jaguar's ever-decreasing income. Therefore, in March 1990, the project was scrapped, replaced instead by a light facelift and rebrand for the XJS, while focus and resources were placed into a refreshed luxury saloon to replace the XJ40, known as the X300, which was due for launch in 1994. Following the end of the F-Type in 1990, much of the design work behind the car was repurposed for another budding project inside one of Ford's new acquisitions, a replacement for the 20-year-old Aston Martin V8, Ford having purchased a 75% stake in Aston Martin during 1987, when the dwindling car maker was desperate for funds. This new model was envisaged as an entry-level Grand Tourer that would help endear the company to a wider audience than the niche Virage and Vantage as the Aston Martin flagships, the car being developed in conjunction with Tom Wilkinshaw Racing or TWR, which had also been heavily involved with Jaguar in developing touring car versions of the XJS and the XJ220 supercar. The Jaguar connection meant Aston Martin could easily repurpose the failed F-Type concept into their spiritual replacement for the classic DB5 and DB6 of the 1960s, dubbed the DB7, including elements from the XJ41 and 42's body engineering, while any gaps in the design that were too difficult for the low-cost Aston Martin development team to manage were carried over from the XJS. Developed under the direction of Ian Callum, the concept was originally designated Project XX, with the express purpose of being a successor to the failed F-Type concept, but when presented to the Jaguar board, even though initial impressions were highly enthusiastic, Tom Wilkinshaw himself asked a steep price from Jaguar for the licensed use of his engineering within the scheme. At the same time, the prototype had been developed with no intention to be sold on the American market, having no safety or emissions features that would pass the stringent legislation of the federal government, Jaguar responding by abandoning the project, which was ultimately picked up shortly thereafter by Aston Martin, and went on to become the landmark DB7 of September 1994. The DB7 would set the trend for the firm's signature aesthetic and sports-orientated performance for the next 20 years, with descendants of the car, including the Vanquish, the DB9, the DBS V12 and the Vantage, all being generations of the same design ethos, the car even finding its way back to Jaguar in 1996, when a modified version based on the XJS platform was released, dubbed the XK8, and would go on to become a major sales coup for the British luxury car builder, thanks to its magnificent mixture of style, performance and comfort. As for the desire to create a dedicated F-Type, this would re-emerge in 2000 with the lightweight F-Type Speedster, a concept car displayed at the 2000 Detroit Auto Show, and derived much of its mechanical underpinnings from the S-Type saloon. The car was praised for its retro looks, but due to a slew of reliability and commercial problems with the X-Type low-end saloon, which created a large number of expensive warranty claims, and was received poorly by the buying public as simply a Ford Mondeo with a Jaguar body, the Ford management opted to cancel the F-Type in favour of placing a greater emphasis on Jaguar's Formula One endeavours. The F-Type would ultimately re-emerge again in 2011, after Jaguar had been sold to Tata Steel of India 3 years earlier, this latest version, dubbed the Jaguar CX-16, being created to complement the firm's proposed successor to the XJ220 supercar, the CX-75 concept of 2010. However, while the CX-75 never went beyond several development prototypes, the CX-16 was lauded for its mixture of looks and performance, being fitted with a 3-litre supercharged Jaguar AJ126 V6 engine, producing 375 horsepower, and giving the car a 0-60 time of 4.4 seconds, and a top speed that was electronically limited to 186 miles an hour, the success of this car giving Jaguar the incentive to put it into production as the F-Type from 2013. The F-Type would remain on sale until June 2024, while receiving a facelift in 2019, and would become one of Jaguar's most commercially successful products with 87,000 units built, the car being a must-have accessory for the front drives of Beverly Hills in a manner similar to its E-Type predecessor 50 years earlier, but would meet its end as the company moved towards electric replacements for its internal combustion models. In the end, the F-Type concept of the 1980s was a car that could have worked wonders for the newly independent Jaguar had it reached production on time, and was based on its original weight and specifications, but due to the turbulence of the company's finances, combined with various changes to the design that led ultimately to an ever-increasing mass and width that made it unappealing, the F-Type was doomed to remain merely a concept. At the same time, in the face of the firm's questionable quality control during this period, had the F-Type come to fruition alongside the likes of the XJS and the XJ40 saloon during 1988, these pervasive issues of reliability would have likely resulted in this beautiful car being tarnished with the same unfortunate brush as its stablemates, souring the reputation of a machine that, based on its pedigree lineage throughout Jaguar's long and distinguished history, simply didn't deserve to be laboured with such a harsh perception.